The grand hall of Aurora Spire stretched before me like a cathedral made of starlight and steel. Crystal panels curved overhead in perfect mathematical spirals, each one calibrated to filter the harsh radiation from the nearby binary stars into something that wouldn't instantly fry the more delicate species in attendance. The Serev had outdone themselves with the architecture, though I suspected they'd hired Andromedan engineers for the actual structural work. The Serev were many things, but humble about their limitations wasn't one of them. I stood at my designated position near the main conference table, hands clasped behind my back in the standard security stance that made me look appropriately intimidating, yet professionally invisible. The weight of my service weapon sat comfortably against my ribs, though the chances of needing it here were slim. Aurora Spire had 14 layers of security screening, automated defense turrets every 20 meters, and enough scanning tech to detect a hostile thought from 3 sectors away. Still, the Alliance had insisted on human security for this summit. Something about our unique adaptive capabilities and unpredictable tactical thinking. Really, I think they just wanted to remind everyone that despite being relative newcomers to the galactic stage, humans had earned their seat at the table through more than just diplomatic sweet talk. Ambassador Lyris swept into the hall like she owned not just the room, but the entire station. The Serev delegation flanked her in perfect formation, their movements so synchronized they might have been choreographed. She wore the traditional diplomatic robes of her people, a flowing ensemble that seemed to be cut from liquid mercury, shifting between silver and deep blue as she moved. Her skin had that distinctive Serev luminescence, a soft pearl white that caught the light in ways that made her look like she'd been carved from moonstone. High cheekbones, eyes that were just slightly too large to be human, colored like amethysts with gold flecks that supposedly indicated her noble bloodline. Beautiful, sure, if you were into the whole untouchable Ice Queen aesthetic. She glided past me without so much as a glance, though I knew she'd seen me. The Serev had peripheral vision that extended nearly 200 degrees. Her assistant, a younger Serev male named Korvac, who always looked like he was about 3 seconds from a nervous breakdown, scrambled to keep up with her longer strides. "Ambassador," I said, inclining my head slightly as she passed. It was protocol to acknowledge the primary dignitary you were assigned to protect. She paused, just for a moment, and I thought she might actually respond. Instead, she turned to Korvac and said, in that crystalline voice that could probably shatter glass if she raised it an octave, "Ensure the human furniture doesn't obstruct the viewing angles for the presentation. The Zilani delegates have sensitive optical requirements." Human furniture, right. Korvac's eyes widened slightly, the Serev equivalent of mortification. He glanced at me apologetically, or at least I thought it was apologetic. Reading Serev facial expressions was like trying to interpret abstract art while drunk. "Perhaps we should review the seating arrangements," Korvac suggested weakly. "The seating is adequate," Lyris replied, already moving toward the head of the table. I was referring to the decorative element the Alliance insisted on providing. Several of the other delegates were filtering in now. The Zilani with their 4 arms and constantly shifting skin patterns that supposedly conveyed emotion, but mostly just gave me a headache to look at. The Morok delegation, essentially sentient rocks who communicated through harmonic vibrations that the universal translators struggled to parse correctly. A few Terran diplomats who shot me sympathetic looks, but said nothing. I maintained my position, expression neutral. I'd been called worse things than furniture, usually by people who were actively trying to kill me. At least Lyris was just being dismissive, rather than violent. The morning session progressed with all the excitement of watching paint, dry in zero gravity, trade agreements, mining rights, disputes over navigation corridors through contested space. Lyris commanded the room with the kind of natural authority that came from centuries of selective breeding for leadership. Every word was measured, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. when the Morik delegation raised concerns about human expansion into the Outer Rim territories. She deflected with such diplomatic finesse that they ended up thanking her for essentially telling them no. I had to admit, she was good at her job. Shame about the personality. Lunch was served in the adjoining reception hall, a slightly less formal space where delegates could mingle and conduct the real negotiations, the ones that happened over expensive imported delicacies and casual conversation. I positioned myself near the entrance, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough away to not intrude on the political peacocking. Korvac approached me with a plate of something that looked like blue caviar, but smelled like burnt rubber. Carolyn fish eggs, he explained, though I hadn't asked. A delicacy on Serev Prime. The ambassador insisted they be served. I'll pass, I said. Pretty sure those would kill me. Oh no, they're quite safe for human consumption. We had them tested. He paused, antenna twitching slightly. Though they might cause mild hallucinations and temporary blindness. And there was that one test subject who experienced spontaneous telepathy, but that might have been coincidental. Definitely passing. Korvac shifted nervously, glancing back at where Lyris was holding court with a group of Zelani traders. She doesn't mean to be rude, condescending, acting like I'm a piece of furniture. Traditional, Korvac finished weakly. The Serev have very particular views about hierarchies, and humans are at the bottom. Not the bottom, he said quickly. That would be the Vorthak. They eat their own young. Charming, but humans are new, unproven. Your species has only been part of the Alliance for 30 standard cycles. The Serev have been spacefaring for over 3,000. And yet here I am, protecting your ambassador at the Alliance's request? Korvac's antennae drooped slightly. Yes, well, politics. He scurried away when Lyris gestured imperiously in his direction. I watched him try to juggle his plate, a data pad, and a ceremonial serving knife while speed-walking in her direction. The inevitable happened about 3 steps later. The plate tilted. The blue caviar began sliding. Korvac overcorrected, sending the entire mess arcing through the air in a perfect trajectory toward Lyris's pristine robes. Time slowed down the way it always did when my combat reflexes kicked in. I moved without thinking, crossing the 15 feet between us in less than 2 seconds. My hand intercepted the plate just inches from Lyris's back, catching most of the caviar, though a few drops of the accompanying sauce splattered onto my sleeve. Lyris turned, those purple gold eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Korvac standing frozen in horror. Me holding the plate, the obvious trajectory of what had almost happened. Your assistant appears to have difficulty with basic motor functions, she said coolly. Perhaps the Alliance should assign someone more competent. Korvac's skin went from pearl white to a sickly gray. Ambassador, The fault was mine, I interrupted. I bumped into him while changing position. Clumsy of me. Lyris's gaze shifted to me fully, for the first time since she'd arrived. I could see her processing this, weighing the obvious lie against the social dynamics of the situation. Blaming the human was certainly more convenient than dealing with a disgraced assistant. How unexpected, she said, tone suggesting it was anything but. Though I suppose coordination issues are to be expected when one insists on staffing critical positions based on political convenience rather than merit. One of the Zelani delegates had drifted closer. Skin patterns shifting to what I'd learned indicated amusement. Perhaps the human could benefit from Serev training protocols. I understand they have excellent programs for service staff. A few chuckles from the gathered aliens. The Terran delegates looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Politics meant swallowing pride sometimes. Actually, I said, setting the plate down carefully. I did complete Serev combat training, scored in the top percentile, if I remember correctly. Lyris's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Impossible. Serev combat training is restricted to allied military forces. Special exemption. 3 years ago, just after the Kepler Station incident. Your military wanted to understand human combat methods, and we wanted to learn yours. Exchange program. The Kepler Station incident, the Zelani delegate mused. Wasn't that where a single human soldier held off an entire Vorthak raiding party? 3 soldiers, I corrected, and we had defensive advantages. Still impressive, another voice chimed in. One of the Morok harmonics translating as something like approval. Lyris's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Past military accomplishments hardly qualify one for diplomatic security. Different skill sets entirely. Of course, Ambassador. I agreed mildly. Though I'd argue that keeping people alive requires similar instincts, regardless of the setting. She turned away without responding, but I caught Korvac shooting me a grateful look before scrambling after her. The afternoon session resumed with discussions about the new trade routes through the Spiral Nebula. Lyris presented the Serev proposal with her usual cold efficiency, highlighting the benefits to the Alliance while glossing over the fact that it would give the Serev near-monopolistic control over rare mineral extraction in 3 systems. I found myself studying her as she spoke, trying to figure out what it was about humans specifically that seemed to offend her so much. The Serev were snobs in general, sure, but her reaction to me felt personal somehow, like my very existence in her space was an insult. The other delegates asked predictable questions, raised token objections that Lyris deflected with practiced ease. She had an answer for everything, charts and projections and carefully worded agreements that sounded reasonable until you really thought about what they meant. It was the Terran delegate, surprisingly, who threw the first real wrench in her plans. Ambassador Harrison was old-school diplomatic corps, the kind of guy who'd been negotiating treaties since before first contact. He had a gift for asking simple questions that exposed complicated problems. The proposed route passes within 2 light-years of the contested zone, he said mildly. Given recent Vorthak activity in that region, how does the Serev delegation propose to ensure safe passage? Lyris didn't miss a beat. The Serev fleet is more than capable of defending commercial vessels. Our technology nearly failed at Proxima Station last month, Harrison interrupted. If I recall correctly, it was human irregular forces that managed to drive off the raiders. An isolated incident. And at the Betelgeuse supply depot 2 weeks before that. And the incident near the Horsehead Nebula the month before that? The room had gone quiet. This was moving beyond polite disagreement into actual confrontation territory. Lyris's hands remained perfectly still on the table, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. The human tendency to glorify violence is well documented. A few lucky skirmishes hardly constitute a pattern of superior capability. Lucky, Harrison's eyebrows rose. Ambassador, in the past 6 months, human security forces have successfully defended Alliance assets in 17 separate incidents. The Serev fleet has responded to 12 similar situations, with a success rate of... He made a show of checking his datapad. 41%? Ouch, those numbers had to sting. Your statistics fail to account for the complexity of the situations. The statistics account for mission success or failure? Rather binary, really. Lyris stood slowly, grace and menace in equal measure. Perhaps the human delegation would prefer to handle all security matters independently. Then, I'm certain the Alliance would be fascinated to see how your species' propensity for violence translates to long-term strategic success. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. This was the kind of diplomatic incident that could spiral into something much worse, if not handled carefully. Harrison opened his mouth to respond, but I moved first. Not aggressively. Just a slight shift in position that put me more directly in Lyris's line of sight. It was subtle, but she noticed. Her eyes flicked to me, and for just a moment, I saw something beyond the cold disdain, uncertainty, maybe, or calculation. Perhaps, I said, though I absolutely should not have been speaking. We could table the security discussion until after the infrastructure proposals. I believe the Morocco delegation had concerns about the environmental impact assessments. It was a breach of protocol for security to speak during formal sessions, but it also offered everyone an out. The Morocco delegate rumbled something that might have been agreement. Harrison sat back. Message delivered. Lyris remained standing for another heartbeat before settling back into her chair with fluid grace. The environmental concerns are addressed in Appendix 7, she said, as if the last few minutes hadn't happened. The session continued, but the underlying tension remained. I'd drawn attention to myself, which was the opposite of what good security should do, but I'd also prevented a diplomatic incident from escalating, which was exactly what good security should do. Complicated job, this. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed Lyris glancing in my direction more frequently. Not obviously, just little flicks of attention between speaking points. I kept my expression neutral, professional. Whatever game she was playing, I wasn't interested in being a pawn. The session was scheduled to break at local sunset, which meant nothing on a space station but helped maintain circadian rhythms for the various species present. As delegates began gathering their materials, Korvac approached Lyris with a secure communication device. "Priority message from Serev Prime. Ambassador," he said quietly, though not quietly enough that I couldn't hear. She took the device, fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Whatever she read made her antennae twitch slightly. Concern, anger. I still couldn't read Serev expressions well enough to tell. "Inform the delegation will be departing immediately after tomorrow's morning session," she told Korvac. "But Ambassador, the summit is scheduled for 3 more days." "The situation has changed." She handed back the device. "Make the arrangements." She swept past me again on her way out, but this time she paused. For just a moment, she looked directly at me. "Your intervention earlier was unnecessary," she said quietly, but not unnoticed. Before I could respond, she was gone, leaving me with the distinct feeling that I'd just been both insulted and thanked in the same breath. The reception hall emptied quickly after that. Delegates dispersed to their quarters or private meetings, leaving me with the cleanup crew and my own thoughts. I was technically off duty once Lyris left the public spaces, but something made me linger. The station's night cycle was beginning, lights dimming to simulate evening. Through the massive observation windows, I could see the binary stars locked in their eternal dance. One red giant and one white dwarf. Gravitational forces keeping them forever circling each other, never quite touching. "Dane Calder." I turned to find Harrison standing behind me, looking tired but satisfied. "Ambassador," I acknowledged. "You handled that well, speaking out of turn to prevent an incident. Risky move. Seemed better than letting things escalate." He chuckled. "The Serev don't like being shown up, especially not by humans. You probably made an enemy today." "Pretty sure I was already on that list." "True enough." He moved to stand beside me at the window. "You know why the Alliance really wanted human security for this summit. Our unique adaptive capabilities." "Politics," he said bluntly. "The Serev have been pushing for greater control over Alliance security operations. They see it as their natural role, being one of the older spacefaring races. Having a human successfully protecting their own ambassador undermines that narrative. So I'm a political statement." "Everything's a political statement out here." He turned to leave, then paused. "Watch yourself tomorrow. Lyris doesn't like losing face, and she definitely lost some today. She'll be looking to even the score." "Great, just what I needed." I stayed at the window a while longer, watching the stars and trying to shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was just the tension from the session, or maybe it was something else. That priority message Lyris had received, the sudden change in plans, the way she'd looked at me before leaving. My instincts had kept me alive through 3 combat tours and more close calls than I cared to count. Right now, They were telling me that tomorrow was going to be anything but routine. I made my way back to my quarters. A small, but comfortable room on the security level. The Alliance had at least given me a window, though the view was mostly of the station's outer hull. I pulled up the security briefings for tomorrow's session, scanning through the routine threat assessments and protocol reminders. Everything looked normal, standard, boring even. So why couldn't I shake the feeling that I was missing something? I thought about Lyris, about the way she'd dismissed me as furniture, about Korvac's nervous fumbling, about Harrison's political maneuvering, everyone playing their roles in the grand diplomatic theater. Tomorrow's morning session would focus on military cooperation agreements. The Serev would push for command positions in joint operations. The humans would resist. The other species would pick sides based on their own interests. Same dance, different day. Except Lyris would be leaving immediately after, cutting the summit short. Why? I pulled up what public information I could find about recent events on Serev Prime. Nothing unusual. Trade disputes. Some minor political reshuffling. A cultural festival celebrating their first contact with another species 3 millennia ago. All routine stuff. But that message had rattled her. I'd seen it in the way her shoulders had tensed, the slight pause before she'd given Korvac his orders. Not my problem, I reminded myself. My job was to keep her alive during the summit, not to understand Serev internal politics. Tomorrow morning's session. Then she'd be gone, and I'd be assigned to some other diplomat who, hopefully, wouldn't refer to me as furniture. Still, as I settled in for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow was going to be anything but simple. The station's air recyclers hummed their mechanical lullaby. Somewhere in the walls, pipes gurgled as water was processed and recirculated. The sounds of a space station at rest, as much as these things ever truly rested. I closed my eyes and tried not to think about purple gold eyes and mercury robes, about the way Lyris had said unnecessary but not unnoticed, like she was cataloging me for some future purpose I couldn't quite grasp. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it, whatever the morning would bring. The morning came too soon, and not soon enough. I'd slept poorly, that nagging instinct keeping me half awake through the night cycle. By the time my alarm chimed, I was already dressed and reviewing security protocols for the 4th time. The Grand Hall looked different in the morning light. The binary stars had shifted position, casting longer shadows through the crystal panels. Maintenance crews had been through during the night, leaving everything gleaming and sterile. Too clean? Maybe. The kind of clean that made you wonder what they were trying to hide. I arrived early, as always. First rule of security: control the environment before the principals arrive. I did my walkthrough, checking sightlines, emergency exits, potential choke points. Everything looked normal. Everything felt wrong. The other security personnel were filtering in. A mix of species, each assigned to their respective delegations. The Zelani security chief, a 4-armed nightmare of chitin and muscle named Krex, nodded at me as he passed. Professional courtesy between people who killed for a living. "Expecting trouble?" he asked, his translator giving his clicks and whistles a gravelly baritone. "Always," I replied. "The human way," he said, though I couldn't tell if it was approval or mockery. "My people prefer to create trouble first, then respond to it." Sounds exhausting. It is, but never boring. He moved on to check his own positions. I noticed he was placing his people differently than yesterday. Tighter formation, better coverage of the exits. So I wasn't the only one feeling paranoid. The delegates began arriving in their usual clusters. The Moric delegation rumbled in first, their harmonic conversations making the air vibrate. Then the Zelani, skin patterns shifting in what looked like animated discussions, but could have been arguments about breakfast for all I knew. Lyris arrived precisely on time, not a second early or late. She moved through the hall with that same liquid grace, Korvac trailing behind her, looking even more nervous than yesterday. Her robes today were darker, deep purple that shifted to black in the shadows. Someone had once told me that Serev clothing colors indicated mood and intention. I'd never learned the code, but dark colors couldn't be good. She took her position at the head of the table without acknowledging anyone. No pleasantries, no diplomatic small talk. Straight to business. "The morning session will be brief," she announced once everyone was seated. "The Serev delegation has urgent matters requiring our attention on Prime. We'll conclude the military cooperation framework and table all other discussions for the next summit." Harrison frowned from his position across the table. "Ambassador, the infrastructure proposals." "Can wait," Lyris cut him off. "Unless the human delegation wishes to delay military agreements in favor of discussing trade routes." It was a trap, and everyone knew it. The military agreements were too important to postpone, but rushing them through without proper debate was dangerous. Classic Serev power play. "Perhaps we could address both in parallel sessions," the Zilani ambassador suggested. "The Serev delegation is not prepared to divide its attention," Lyris replied coldly. "We proceed with military matters, or we proceed with nothing." The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. This wasn't negotiation, it was ultimatum. I shifted my position slightly, moving closer to the table. Something about how quickly Lyris wanted to push this through, combined with yesterday's urgent message and my screaming instincts, had every alarm bell in my head going off. The discussion began, if you could call it that. Lyris presented the Serev position with mechanical efficiency, joint command structures with Serev officers in key positions, shared technology protocols that somehow always required Serev approval, training programs that would essentially make every alliance military force dependent on Serev expertise. It was a power grab, dressed up as cooperation, and everyone knew it. But the Serev had the largest fleet, the most advanced technology, and the political leverage to make opposition costly. Harrison pushed back where he could, but he was fighting a losing battle. The other delegations were either allied with the Serev or too afraid to oppose them openly. Only the Morok seemed genuinely neutral, their silicon-based psychology making them largely indifferent to organic power struggles. I found myself watching the room more than the discussion. Something was off about the energy, the positioning. Korvac kept checking his communication device. Two of the Serev security detail had shifted positions without any obvious reason. One of the maintenance panels in the ceiling had been opened and resealed recently. I could see the fresh tool marks from here. My hand drifted toward my weapon, a casual movement that looked like adjusting my stance. Krex noticed, his 4 eyes tracking my movement. He tilted his head slightly. A question. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. Nothing concrete, just instinct. That's when Lyra stood up. "Before we conclude," she said, "there's one matter requiring immediate attention. The recent security failures in the outer territories have demonstrated that current alliance protocols are insufficient. The Serev delegation proposes—" The world exploded. The blast came from below, erupting through the floor with enough force to flip the massive conference table like a coin. The reinforced hull plating that was supposed to withstand meteor impacts peeled back like paper. The carefully maintained atmosphere rushed out through the breach before emergency shields snapped into place. Training took over. In the split second of the explosion, my mind cataloged priorities. The datapad containing the military agreements had been on the table, now spinning through the air in the chaos. Primary objective, secure classified materials. Secondary objective, protect the principal. I lunged forward, snatching the datapad out of the air just as the second explosion hit. This one came from above, taking out half the ceiling and sending debris raining down. I heard screaming, couldn't tell from who. The artificial gravity flickered, failed, restored itself at half strength. Bodies and debris floated in nauseating slow motion. Through the chaos, I saw Lyris. The first blast had thrown her backward, and she was tumbling through the air, those perfect robes tangling around her legs. Her trajectory was taking her straight toward a twisted piece of metal that had been part of the conference table. Now a spear of jagged death. Time slowed. I had the data pad. Mission priority said secure it and get to safety. Every regulation, every protocol, every bit of training said protect the intelligence first. Fuck protocol. I pushed off from a piece of debris, launching myself across the chaos. The math was going to be close. Too close. I twisted in midair, using the data pad to deflect a smaller piece of shrapnel that would have taken my head off. Reached out with my free hand and caught Lyris around the waist just as she was about to impale herself. We hit the far wall hard. I took most of the impact, feeling something crack in my shoulder. The half-gravity made everything weird, but I managed to orient us against what used to be the floor. Now more of a diagonal surface as the room had partially collapsed. "Are you—" I started to ask, but Lyris wasn't looking at me. She was staring at something behind us, her purple gold eyes wide, with something I'd never expected to see there. Fear. I turned to follow her gaze and saw Koran, her security chief, stepping through the smoke and debris. He was wearing full combat armor, military grade, not the ceremonial stuff security usually wore to these things. In his hand was a plasma rifle that definitely hadn't been approved for station use. "Koran," Lyris said, and her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "What are you doing?" "What needs to be done?" "Ambassador," he replied, his tone conversational, like we were discussing weather. "The Serev have grown weak under leaders like you, too willing to compromise, to share power with lesser species." He said lesser species while looking directly at me. Charming. "The Council approved this summit," Lyris said, trying to summon her diplomatic authority. "Hard to do when you're covered in dust and being held by the human you'd called furniture yesterday." "The Council is part of the problem," Koran said. "But after today, that will change. Your death, killed by apparent human treachery during a terrorist attack, will give us the justification we need to seize direct control of Alliance security. The other species will beg for our protection." "You're insane," I said. He shifted the rifle toward me. "The human speaks. How unexpected. I assumed you were just muscle with no higher brain function." "Common mistake," I said, shifting slightly to put myself between him and Lyris. "People see human. They think primitive. But here's the thing about being primitive. We're really good at recognizing threats. And you've been a threat since you walked in here in that armor. Observant, but too late. Maybe. But here's what I don't get. Why the elaborate explosion? Why not just shoot her in her quarters and blame it on someone else?" Koran smiled. "The Serev equivalent anyway. Their mouths didn't move quite right for human expressions. Because it needs to be public, dramatic. The mighty Serev ambassador killed while under human protection. The story writes itself." "Except I'm still alive," Lyris said. "Not for long." He raised the rifle. I tensed, calculating angles. The data pad in my hand was reinforced. Might deflect one shot if I was lucky. But at this range, with that weapon, luck wasn't going to be enough. That's when the third explosion hit. This one was smaller, more controlled. It took out the emergency shields over the hull breach. Atmosphere started hemorrhaging out again, and suddenly, everyone who wasn't anchored was being pulled toward the vacuum. Koran, standing in the middle of the room, was yanked off his feet. His shot went wide, melting a hole in what was left of the ceiling. I grabbed the exposed beam with one hand, Lyris with the other, and held on as the hurricane tried to tear us away. Through the chaos, I could see other survivors. Harrison was somehow still alive, clinging to a piece of the conference table. Krex had 3 arms anchored and was holding 2 of his delegation with the 4th. Most of the Morik were simply too heavy to be moved by the wind, standing like rocks in a river. And Korvac, poor, nervous, fumbling Korvac was pressed against a remaining section of wall, eyes wide with terror. The emergency systems finally kicked in properly. Another shield snapped into place. Atmosphere stopped bleeding out, and we all collapsed as normal gravity reasserted itself. Well, mostly collapsed. I managed to keep us both on our feet, though my shoulders screamed in protest. Koran was already recovering, pulling himself up from where he'd landed. The rifle was gone, lost in the chaos. But he had a sidearm now, still lethal, still aimed at us. "Persistent," he said, "but this changes nothing." "Koran, please," Lyra said. "We've known each other for 50 cycles. You trained me yourself. Why?" "Because you were supposed to be different," he snarled. The first real emotion I'd seen from him. "You were supposed to understand that the Serev are meant to rule, not negotiate, not compromise with insects and mammals and walking rocks. But you're just like the others. Weak." "Strength isn't about domination," Lyra said quietly. "It's about—" "Spare me the philosophy." He steadied his aim. "Die knowing you were the last of the weak." I moved, not forward. That's what he expected. I went sideways, shoving Lyris behind a chunk of debris while diving the opposite direction. The shot split the difference, missing us both, but close enough that I felt the heat. I rolled, came up with my own weapon finally clear of its holster. Standard kinetic pistol. Nothing fancy, but it would punch through Serev armor at close range. We fired at the same time. His shot took me in the left arm, spinning me around. Mine caught him center mass, sending him stumbling backward. But Serev anatomy was different from human. I'd hit him, but not fatally. He was raising his weapon again when Lyra stood up from behind her cover. "Koran," she said, and her voice had that crystal clarity again, the one that could cut through any chaos. "Stand down. You don't give me orders anymore, Ambassador." "No," she agreed, "but they do." He turned, confused, just as Serev's security forces poured through what was left of the main entrance. Not his people. These wore the distinctive silver armor of the Prime Guard, the Serev equivalent of internal affairs. "Security Chief Koran," their leader announced. "You are under arrest for treason, terrorism, and attempted assassination." Koran looked between them and Lyris, understanding dawning on his face. "You knew." "The message yesterday," Lyris said softly. "It wasn't about leaving early. It was warning me about you. The Council has been investigating your faction for months." "Then why?" "Because we needed proof. Your own confession, broadcast on every emergency channel when the explosion triggered the recorders." She gestured to the still-functioning emergency systems. "Everything you said was transmitted directly to Prime." Koran laughed, bitter and broken. "You used yourself as bait. I trusted the human to keep me alive," she said, glancing at me. "It seemed the prudent choice." The Prime Guard moved in, restraining Koran with energy shackles. He didn't resist, just kept laughing that broken laugh as they dragged him away. And then, suddenly, it was over. Medical teams swarmed in, treating the wounded. Emergency crews began stabilizing what was left of the structure. Someone put a pressure bandage on my arm, shot me full of something that made the pain go away, and the world go fuzzy around the edges. I found myself sitting on a piece of debris that used to be somebody's chair, watching the controlled chaos of disaster response. Lyris appeared beside me, somehow having found time to smooth her robes and clean most of the dust from her face. Even after nearly dying, she managed to look regal. "Your arm," she said, not quite looking at me. "I've had worse. The medical team says you have 3 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, second-degree plasma burns, and enough radiation exposure to require a week of treatment. Like I said, I've had worse." She was quiet for a moment. Around us, the station continued its emergency response ballet. Someone had found Harrison, alive but unconscious. The Morak were helping to shore up structural supports, their strength finally useful for something. "You chose me over the datapad," Lyra said finally. I pulled the scorched device from my belt and handed it to her. "Multitasking." She stared at it, then at me. "You saved both."
Lucky catch.
Luck? She turned the word over like she was tasting it. Is that what humans call it when they do the impossible? Sometimes we call it Tuesday. She made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was hard to tell with Sarev. You knew something was wrong, before the explosion. Instinct. The same instinct that made you put yourself between me and Corin. That was just the job. Was it? She turned to face me fully. Those purple gold eyes studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Because from where I stood, it looked like something else. Yeah, what did it look like? Like someone choosing to protect what matters, regardless of protocol or politics or species. She stood, smoothing her robes again. The summit is obviously postponed, but I'll be remaining on station during the investigation. I'll need security. I'm sure the Prime Guard— I'm requesting you, she interrupted. If you're willing— I looked up at her. This alien who'd called me furniture just yesterday. There was something different in her expression now. Not warmth exactly, but maybe the possibility of it. Even though I'm just a primitive human, especially because of that, she said. It seems I have much to learn about primitive human instincts. She walked away before I could respond, moving through the chaos with that same liquid grace, stopping to check on wounded delegates, taking charge of the situation like she'd been born to it. Which, I supposed, she had been. Korvac appeared at my elbow, looking even more frazzled than usual but alive. She likes you, he said. She called me furniture. Yes, but now you're useful furniture. That's practically a marriage proposal in Sarev culture. You're joking. Mostly, he fidgeted with his datapad. She's never requested specific security before. Always accepted whatever the council assigned. Maybe she just wants to keep an eye on me. Make sure the human doesn't cause more trouble. Maybe, Korvac agreed. Or maybe she's realized that having someone willing to ignore protocol to save her life is more valuable than all the proper procedures in the galaxy. I watched Lyris directing the emergency response, taking control of a situation that should have killed her. She caught me looking and gave the slightest nod. Acknowledgement, gratitude. Something else I couldn't quite read. My arm throbbed despite the painkillers. My ribs sent sharp reminders with every breath. I needed medical attention, rest, and probably a psych eval after everything that had just happened. Instead, I stood up, checked my weapon, and took my position. Still a job to do, and despite everything, or maybe because of it, I was starting to think this assignment might be more interesting than I'd expected. The binary stars continued their eternal dance outside, uncaring about the drama of organic life. The station would be repaired. The investigation would reveal how deep the conspiracy went. Politics would continue in all its messy, dangerous glory. But right now, in this moment, I had a new understanding with the alien who'd ignored me all day yesterday. We'd saved each other's lives. In my experience, that was a foundation you could build on. Even if she did still think of me as furniture. Just useful furniture now. I could work with that. The medical bay was too bright, too clean, and too full of people asking questions I didn't want to answer. How did you know to move when you did? What made you suspect Coran? Why did you save the ambassador instead of following evacuation procedures? I gave them all the same response instinct. They didn't like it, but they couldn't argue with results. The doctor, a Terran woman named Sarah Park, finished sealing the plasma burn on my arm with a tissue regenerator. You're lucky, she said. Another inch to the left and you'd have lost the arm. Lucky, I repeated, thinking about Lyris using the same word. That's me. The ambassador has requested your presence once you're cleared, Park said, making a note on her tablet. Against my medical advice, I should add, you need at least 12 hours of rest. Since when do patients listen to doctors? Since never, which is why I drink. She gave me a shot of something that made my bones stop aching. Try not to get blown up again for at least a day. Professional request. I made my way through the station's temporary command center, set up in what used to be a cargo bay. The main sections were still being repaired, entire decks sealed off while emergency crews worked to make them habitable again. The explosion had done more damage than initially thought. 17 dead, 43 injured. And that was just the physical toll. The political ramifications were still being calculated. Lyris had commandeered a conference room, turning it into a makeshift office. When I entered, she was surrounded by holographic displays, each showing different aspects of the investigation. Korvac was there too, looking frazzled as he tried to manage 3 conversations at once through his earpiece. "Dane," Lyris said without looking up. "Sit." "I'm fine standing." She glanced at me then, those purple gold eyes taking in the medical patches, the stiff way I held my shoulder. "Sit," she repeated, and this time it wasn't a request. I sat. "The investigation has uncovered 12 other conspirators," she said, swiping through files on her display. "All members of what Korin called the True Path faction. They believe the Serev should rule through force rather than diplomacy." "Sounds familiar. Every species has groups like that." "Perhaps. But few have them embedded so deeply in their security apparatus." She pulled up an organizational chart. 3 section chiefs, 5 field commanders, and 4 intelligence analysts, all with access to classified information and operational planning. "You're telling me this why?" "Because I need someone I can trust. And ironically, the human who was forced upon me is the only person I'm certain isn't trying to kill me." "Touching," she almost smiled. "Almost. The Prime Guard wants to assign me an entire security detail. All Serev, all thoroughly vetted, all completely useless if this conspiracy goes deeper than we know." "You think it does?" "I think Korin was arrogant, but not stupid. He wouldn't have moved without believing he had support at the highest levels." She closed the displays and turned to face me fully. "Which brings me to my proposal. I already agreed to be your security. I'm not talking about standard protection. I need someone who can help me investigate without being bound by Serev political constraints. Someone with no loyalty to any faction except staying alive." "And you think that's me?" "I think you saved my life when protocol said you shouldn't have. That suggests you're capable of independent thinking." She paused. "Also, Harrison speaks highly of you." "You talked to Harrison?" "He's recovering in the medical bay. Concussion and 3 broken ribs. But he'll live. He said you served together during the Kepler Station incident." I hadn't known Harrison was there. Different units. But it made sense. That whole mess had involved pretty much everyone with combat training. "He also said you have a talent for seeing patterns others miss," Lyris continued. "That you predicted 3 separate Vorthak attacks based on seemingly unrelated intelligence." "Lucky guesses." "That word again. Luck." She stood, moving to the window that looked out at the damaged section of the station. "Do you know what the Serev call luck?" "Chaos you haven't analyzed yet." "Close. We call it unrecognized pattern recognition. The ability to process information below conscious awareness and act on it instinctively." She turned back to me. "It's a trait we've tried to breed out of our species. We prefer deliberation, careful planning, methodical execution." "How's that working out for you?" 12 conspirators in my security apparatus suggests not well." She returned to her seat. "I need someone who thinks differently. Someone who operates on instinct rather than protocol. Someone who can keep me alive while we uncover how deep this corruption goes." "You want me to help you investigate your own people?" "I want you to do what you do best. See patterns, recognize threats, act on instinct." She paused. "And yes, keep me from getting killed in the process." I thought about it. This was way beyond my job description. I was supposed to be simple security, stand there and look intimidating while the important people did important things. Getting involved in Serev internal politics was a good way to end up dead or worse. But then, I thought about Quran's words. Lesser species. The casual dismissal of anyone not Serev. If his faction gained power, it wouldn't just affect internal politics. It would reshape the entire alliance. What exactly would this investigation involve? I asked. Reviewing personnel files, analyzing communication patterns, identifying potential threats, and possibly walking into situations where anyone could be an enemy. So Tuesday, that almost smile again. Yes, I suppose for a human it would be. Korvac chose that moment to interrupt, his antennae twitching anxiously. Ambassador, the Prime Council is requesting an update. Tell them I'll report when I have something substantial to report. They're insisting. They can insist all they want. I'm not presenting speculation as fact. She turned back to me. Another thing you should know. The Council isn't happy about my request for human security. They see it as an admission of weakness. Is it? It's an admission that our way of doing things nearly got me killed. If that's weakness, so be it. I studied her. Yesterday. She'd been all arrogance and dismissal. Now there was something else. Not humility exactly, but maybe the beginning of awareness that perfection was a myth. All right, I said. I'm in. But we do this my way when it comes to security. You don't go anywhere without me knowing about it first. You don't meet with anyone I haven't vetted. And if I say we leave, we leave. No arguments. You're giving me conditions. I'm establishing parameters for keeping you alive. Take it or leave it. She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her wrestling with the idea of ceding any control. The Serev didn't do subordination well. Agreed, she said finally. With one condition of my own. You learn to work within Serev culture when necessary. That means formal protocols, proper address, and at least attempting to understand why we do things the way we do. Fair enough. Good. We start immediately. She pulled up a new display. These are the personnel files for everyone who had access to the conference room's structural systems. Someone planted those explosives, and it wasn't Corin. He was with his delegation all morning. I leaned forward, studying the files. 37 names, all with security clearance, all with opportunity. We need to narrow this down. Who had access in the last 48 hours? 12 people. Who among them had technical expertise with explosives? She filtered the list. 4. Any connections to Corin or the True Path faction? Not officially, but that means nothing. The faction hid their allegiances well. I studied the 4 remaining names. 3 Serev, 1 Andromedan on contract for maintenance. Pull up their duty rosters for the last week. She did. I saw it immediately. There. 3rd name, Operator Tevik. He pulled 3 consecutive night shifts, all alone, all in sections that would give him access to the conference room's infrastructure. That's not unusual. Night shifts are typically. Look at his previous schedule. He normally works days. Someone switched with him for those 3 nights. I pointed at the roster. Find out who and you'll find another conspirator. Lyris pulled up more records, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Operator Moran. She requested the schedule change citing family obligations. Check her family status. No registered family on station. Her bloodline is based on Serev Prime. No visits scheduled. Lyris's expression hardened. She lied on official documentation. Both of them need to be detained immediately. Already sending the order, she paused. How did you see that so quickly? Pattern recognition. You look for what doesn't fit. Night shift workers who usually work days. Schedule changes with weak justification. It's about seeing what's trying too hard to look normal. You've done this before. Different context, same principle. Insurgents trying to blend into civilian populations. Saboteurs pretending to be regular workers. The patterns are always there if you know how to look. The door chimed. Lyris checked her security display before allowing entry. A Prime Guard officer entered, helmet under his arm, expression grim. Ambassador, we've detained both operators. Preliminary interrogation suggests they were coerced. Someone threatened their bloodlines on Prime if they didn't cooperate.
Who?
They claim not to know. Orders came through encrypted channels, untraceable. Someone with access to high-level encryption and the ability to threaten established bloodlines. I said. That narrows it down. To about half the ruling council, Lyris said bitterly. The officer shifted uncomfortably. There's more. We've received intelligence about a second attack. Details are scarce, but it's supposed to happen during the memorial service tomorrow. Cancel it, I said immediately. We can't, Lyris replied. To cancel would be seen as cowardice. The dead deserve proper honors. The dead would probably prefer you didn't join them. Nevertheless, I must attend. It's not negotiable. I wanted to argue, but I could see it would be pointless. The Serev had their own version of honor, and apparently it included walking into obvious traps. Fine, but we do this smart. I want complete control over security arrangements. Every person there gets scanned, every corner checked, and we have multiple exit strategies. The Prime Guard will never agree to human control over... Then, the Prime Guard can explain to the Council why they let their ambassador die. Again. The officer looked between us, clearly out of his depth. Lyris made a subtle gesture, and he retreated quickly. You can't speak to the Prime Guard that way, she said, once he was gone. I just did. They could file a diplomatic complaint. Let them. I'm more concerned about keeping you breathing than keeping them happy. She studied me for a long moment. You really don't care about political consequences. Do you? Politics doesn't stop plasma bolts. No, but it determines who's firing them. She pulled up another display. The memorial service will have representatives from every species in the Alliance. If something happens there, it could spark an interspecies incident, or war. I stood, pacing to the window. The damaged section of the station looked like a wound against the stars. That might be the real goal. Not just killing you, but creating chaos. Chaos that the true path could exploit to seize power. Exactly. I turned back to her. We need to assume everyone at that service is either a target or a threat. Maybe both. That's a cheerful thought. Welcome to security work. Paranoia is a job requirement. Korvac entered again, looking even more frazzled. Ambassador, I've completed the arrangements for temporary quarters. The human has been assigned... The human has a name, Lyris interrupted. Use it. Korvac blinked, his antennae doing that nervous twitch. Of course. Mr. Calder has been assigned quarters adjacent to yours, as requested. Good. And Korvac start compiling a list of everyone who knew about the memorial service arrangements before they were announced. That would be extensive, Ambassador. Then you'd better get started. He scurried out, and I caught Lyris rubbing her temples. For the first time, she looked tired, the perfect composure cracking just slightly. When's the last time you ate? I asked. This morning. Before... She stopped. Before everything went to hell. Come on, even ambassadors need food. I have work to... Which you'll do better if you're not running on empty. Besides, we need to go over security protocols for tomorrow, and I think better with food. She looked like she wanted to argue, but then her stomach made a sound that transcended species barriers. Hunger was universal. Fine, but we work while we eat. The station's auxiliary cafeteria was mostly empty. Just a few night shift workers and emergency personnel grabbing quick meals. I got standard human fare, protein and carbs that would keep me functional. Lyris selected something from the Serev menu that looked like crystallized flowers, but smelled like ozone. We sat in a corner booth, away from everyone else. I'd positioned us so I could see all entrances, and she had her back to a wall. She noticed. Always working, she observed. Habit. A useful one. She took a delicate bite of her crystal flower thing. Tell me about the Kepler station incident. Why? Because Harrison said you were instrumental in the defense, but the official reports barely mention you. I was just a sergeant. Officers get the credit. That's not what Harrison said. I pushed food around my plate. Kepler wasn't a memory I enjoyed revisiting. It was a mess. Vorthak raiders hit us during a shift change. Half our security was either coming on or going off duty. They knew exactly when we'd be most vulnerable. Inside information. Had to be. They bypassed every security checkpoint, knew exactly where to hit to cause maximum chaos. I paused. Kind of like today. But you stopped them. We adapted. That's what humans do. When the plan goes to hell, we improvise. I met her eyes. The Vorthak expected us to follow protocol, fall back to defensive positions, wait for reinforcements. Instead, we went on the offensive, hit them where they didn't expect, used maintenance tunnels they didn't know about. And it worked. Mostly, we lost 38 people, but we saved the station and 300 civilians. She was quiet for a moment. Is that why you saved me instead of just the datapad? The civilians at Kepler? Maybe. Or maybe I just don't like seeing people die if I can prevent it. Even people who call you furniture. Especially them. They usually learn better if they survive long enough. That almost smile appeared again. Are you suggesting I'm learning? You used my name when talking to Korvac. That's progress. Small steps. She finished her meal, then pulled up the memorial service arrangements on her personal display. The service is scheduled for tomorrow at noon. The main memorial hall can hold 500 people. Too many variables. It's already been announced. Every delegation will send representatives. Then we control the variables we can... I studied the layout. Single entrance is good, easy to monitor, but we need emergency exits that only we know about. The maintenance tunnels? You're learning. We map every possible route out of that hall. If something goes wrong, we don't head for the obvious exits. And if nothing goes wrong, then we have a boring memorial service and everyone goes home alive. That's the goal. She leaned back, and for a moment the exhaustion showed through again. This isn't how I expected this summit to go. Plans rarely survive first contact with reality. A human saying, military saying, probably universal. The Sarev version is, perfection is the first casualty of implementation. I like mine better, shorter. Efficiency over poetry? How very human. We spent the next hour going over every detail of the memorial service. Entry points, sight lines, potential threats. She had a good tactical mind once she stopped thinking like a diplomat and started thinking like a survivor. Finally, she closed the display. We should rest. Tomorrow will be challenging. Understatement. We made our way to our quarters. Me walking slightly behind and to her left. Good position to cover threats from most angles. The corridors were quieter now. Most of the station in night cycle. Dane, she said as we reached her door. Why did you really agree to this, the investigation, not just the security? I thought about it. Because Karan was wrong. The Sarev aren't meant to rule any more than humans are. We're all just trying to survive out here. Together. When we're lucky. That word again. It's a good word. Covers a lot of ground. She opened her door, then paused. Thank you for earlier, for everything. Just doing my job. No, she said quietly. You're doing much more than that. She went inside before I could respond. I did a quick check of my own quarters, basic security sweep, then settled in for what I knew would be a restless night. Tomorrow we'd stand in a room full of potential enemies and pretend everything was normal. We'd honor the dead while trying not to join them. And somewhere in that crowd would be the next threat, the next conspiracy, the next attempt on Lyris's life. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, I had a few hours to plan, to prepare, to figure out how to keep an alien ambassador alive in a universe that seemed determined to kill her. Just another Tuesday in paradise. The memorial service was 3 hours away, and I hadn't slept. Not unusual for me before a high-risk operation. But this felt different. The station's damaged sections groaned and settled through the night, each sound making me reach for my weapon. When dawn finally came, or what passed for dawn on a space station, I was running on stimulants and stubbornness. Lyris was already awake when I knocked on her door. She answered fully dressed in formal morning attire, deep black robes with silver threading that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Sarev honored their dead with absence of color, apparently. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "Thanks. You look like you're going to a funeral." "That's the point. Also makes you an easy target, black silhouette against any background." She paused, considering. "I hadn't thought of it that way. That's why you have me." I handed her a small device, no bigger than a button. "Pin this inside your robes. Personal shield generator. Military grade. Not the ceremonial stuff. These are restricted technology." "So is dying. Put it on." She took it, fingers brushing mine for just a moment. Her skin was cooler than human normal, smooth, like polished stone. "You're expecting trouble." "I'm expecting someone to try to finish what Karan started. The question is how." We made our way through the station toward the memorial hall, taking a deliberately indirect route. I'd mapped 17 different paths the night before, choosing this one at random just minutes ago. If someone had planned an ambush, they'd have to be covering a lot of ground. Korvac met us halfway, looking like he hadn't slept either. His antennae drooped with exhaustion. "Ambassador, I've completed the list you requested. 234 people knew about the memorial arrangements before the public announcement." "Too many," I said. "We need to narrow it down. Who had access to both the announcement and the structural plans for the memorial hall?" Korvac checked his datapad. 43 people. "Who among them has connections to anyone already arrested?" "Checking. 6 individuals. There's your shortlist. I want their locations monitored during the service." "The Prime Guard won't appreciate." "The Prime Guard can appreciate whatever they want after we survive this." Lyris interrupted. "Do as Dane says." We entered the memorial hall through a service entrance I'd scouted earlier. The main space was already filling with delegates and dignitaries. A sea of different species, all dressed in their own versions of mourning attire. The Zalani wore patterns that shifted slowly, like dying stars. The Morak had etched the names of the dead into their stone-like bodies. Even the Vorthak had sent a representative, though they stood apart from everyone else, as was their way. I positioned Lyris near a structural pillar that provided cover from 3 directions. "Stay here. Don't move unless I tell you to." "I need to give a speech." "You can give it from here." "The podium is a kill box. Anyone standing there is exposed from 5 different angles." I pointed to where the podium stood in the center of the hall. "You speak from here or not at all." She looked like she wanted to argue, but something in my expression stopped her. Maybe she was learning to recognize when I was in full paranoid mode. The service began with a reading of the names. 17 dead, each one a reminder of how badly we'd failed yesterday. I scanned the crowd continuously, looking for anything out of place. A delegate who was sweating too much. A security officer whose hand stayed too close to their weapon. Anything that screamed threat. Harrison was there, against medical advice, standing with the Terran delegation despite the visible pain each breath caused him. He caught my eye and nodded slightly. He'd noticed the unusual security arrangements. The way I'd positioned, not just myself, but influenced where others stood through subtle crowd control. Old soldier recognizing another old soldier's work. Lyris began her speech, and I had to admit she was good. Her voice carried perfectly through the hall's acoustics, each word precisely chosen to honor the dead while calling for unity among the living. She managed to make standing behind a pillar look like a deliberate choice rather than a security measure. That's when I saw it. Movement in the maintenance tunnel access I'd marked as a potential threat point. Just a shadow, but wrong for the lighting in that section. I touched the communication device in my ear. Krex, Northwest Maintenance Access. You see it? The Zalani security chief's voice came back immediately. Moving to intercept. No. If they see you coming, they'll trigger whatever they're planning early. Just be ready. I shifted position slightly, putting myself between the maintenance access and Lyris. If someone came through that tunnel, they'd have to go through me first. Lyris continued her speech, unaware of the danger. Or maybe she was aware and just had that much faith in me. Either way, she didn't falter. The shadow moved again, closer to the access panel. My hand found my weapon, not drawing it, but ready. Around the room, other security personnel were picking up on the tension. The Morak guard shifted their massive bulk slightly. 2 Terran officers adjusted their positions. Then the access panel exploded outward, but not from an attacker. Korvac tumbled through, his formal robes torn and dirty, gasping for breath. "Ambassador, they're coming, they're—" The main entrance exploded, not like yesterday's structural blast, but the focused breach of a military assault. Figures in combat armor poured through, weapons raised. Not Serev armor. These were mixed species, mercenaries from the look of them. "Down," I shouted, pulling Lyris behind the pillar as energy bolts filled the air where she'd been standing. The memorial hall erupted into chaos. Delegates scattered, some running for exits, others taking cover. Security personnel returned fire, but they were outnumbered and out of position. "The maintenance tunnels," I said to Lyris. "Now." "But the delegates are not my responsibility. You are— Move." I half-dragged her toward the tunnel Korvac had come through. He was still on the ground, gasping. I hauled him up with my free hand. "Can you run?" They killed the guards. Came from nowhere." "Save it for later. Run now." We dove into the maintenance tunnel just as another explosion rocked the memorial hall. The tunnel was cramped, maybe 4 feet in diameter, meant for automated maintenance bots rather than people. Emergency lighting cast everything in red, making it feel like we were crawling through an artery. "This wasn't in your escape routes," Lyris said, her voice tight. "Because it's not an escape route. It's a maintenance shaft." I pushed her forward. "Keep moving. We need to get to Junction 3 Alpha." "What's at Junction 3 Alpha?" Options. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the station's guts. Behind us, I could hear pursuit, voices shouting, the clang of armor against metal. They were following us in. We reached a wider section where several tunnels met. I pushed Lyris and Korvac to one side and turned back the way we'd come. "Keep going. Tunnel 2 leads to the cargo bay." "What about you?" "I'm going to slow them down." I pulled a device from my belt, something I definitely wasn't supposed to have. "Go." She grabbed my arm. "You can't fight them all." "Not planning to fight. Just going to make them reconsider their life choices." I activated the device and tossed it back down the tunnel we'd come from. "Now run." We ran. The device detonated behind us. Not an explosion, but an electromagnetic pulse that would fry any electronics in a 20-meter radius. In a confined space, with enemies wearing powered armor, it would be like suddenly wrapping them in dead weight. "That was illegal," Korvac gasped as we crawled through another section. "So is trying to kill an ambassador. I'll take my chances with the courts." We emerged into a mechanical room, full of pipes and processing units for the station's water recycling system. I sealed the access hatch behind us, then shot the control panel for good measure. "That won't hold them long," I said. "Long enough?" Lyris asked. "Depends on how motivated they are." The sound of cutting tools on the hatch answered that question. Very motivated. I looked around the room, mapping angles and cover. Behind the main processor, move. We took position behind a massive cylinder that hummed with the sound of water being purified. I checked my weapon's charge, 3/4 full. Not enough for a prolonged fight. Korvac, I said, that tunnel you came through. How did you know about it? I was following someone. Operator Yinth. She was acting suspicious. Kept checking her communication device. Where is she now? Dead. They killed her after she led them to the maintenance access. Cleaning up loose ends. I risked a look around the processor. The hatch was glowing red from the cutting tools. They'll be through in 30 seconds. We can't fight them all, Lyra said. No, but we can make them work for it. I pointed to a valve on the processor. When I say, turn that full open. What will that do? Hopefully something interesting. The hatch fell inward with a crash. 3 mercenaries pushed through, weapons sweeping the room. I waited until they were fully inside, then nodded to Lyris. She turned the valve. Superheated steam erupted from vents throughout the room, instantly turning the air into a scalding fog. The mercenaries' armor would protect them, but their visibility was zero. I moved through the steam like it was home, using the sound of their armor servos to track them. The first one never saw me coming. I hit him low, below the armor's protection, sending him crashing into a pipe. His weapon spun away into the fog. The second one fired blindly, energy bolts lighting up the steam like lightning. I dropped flat, rolled, came up behind him. The armor had a weak point at the neck joint. I exploited it, dropping him with a precise strike. The third one was smarter. He backed toward the hatch, calling for reinforcements. I couldn't let him establish a position at the entrance. I grabbed the first mercenary's weapon and put 2 shots into his chest plate. The armor held, but the kinetic force knocked him back through the hatch. Move, I shouted to Lyris and Korvac. Other exit. We ran through the steam toward the room's other entrance. More mercenaries were pushing through the hatch behind us, but the steam was still thick enough to provide cover. We burst through into a corridor, nearly colliding with a group of Prime Guard. Ambassador, their leader said. We've been looking for... Not now, I interrupted. We need to get her to a secure location. The command center has been fortified. No. Too obvious. I thought quickly. The medical bay. It has its own life support, multiple exits, and Dr. Park keeps emergency weapons. Lyris looked at me. How do you know that? I make it my business to know. Move. We ran through the station, the Prime Guard forming a protective formation around us. Behind, I could hear the sounds of fighting as security forces engaged the mercenaries. The attack was bigger than just an assassination attempt. This was a full assault. We reached the medical bay to find it in lockdown. Dr. Park let us in, her expression grim. I've got 30 injured from the memorial hall. What the hell happened? Assassination attempt turned invasion, I said. We need to use your emergency bunker. I don't have an emergency bunker. The quarantine ward. Reinforced walls, separate life support, one way in or out. It'll do. We moved Lyris into the quarantine ward. It wasn't ideal, but it was defensible. I posted the Prime Guard at the entrance and finally allowed myself a moment to breathe. Lyris was sitting on one of the medical beds, her morning robes torn and stained with steam condensation and whatever else we'd crawled through. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely shaken. They knew, she said quietly. They knew exactly where I'd be, exactly when to strike. Someone's feeding them information, I agreed. Someone high up? Korvac, who'd been silent since we reached the medical bay, suddenly spoke up. I might know who. We both turned to him. Operator Yinth, the one I followed. Before they killed her. She said something. The hierarchs will be done. Lyris went very still. Hierarch is an old title. It hasn't been used since the old empire, Korvac finished. 3,000 years ago. The true path isn't just about Serev's supremacy, I said, understanding dawning. They want to restore the old empire. With them in charge, Lyris added. And that means... An explosion rocked the medical bay. Not close, but close enough. The lights flickered. They're not trying to kill you, I said. They're trying to capture you. A dead ambassador is a martyr. A living one who can be forced to legitimize their coup is much more valuable, Lyris finished. Dr. Park stuck her head into the quarantine ward. We've got a problem. They're cutting through the outer hull. They're going to breach directly into the medical bay. I looked around the quarantine ward. One way in, one way out. What had seemed defensible now looked like a trap. We need to move, I said. Where? Lyris asked. They seem to know everywhere we'll go. I thought about it, then smiled. No. They know everywhere you're supposed to go. Time to be unpredictable. I turned to Park. Doctor, I need you to do something that's going to sound crazy. After today, nothing sounds crazy. I need you to trigger a contamination alert. Full lockdown. Emergency venting of this entire section. That would force everyone in environmental suits, including the attackers. Level the playing field. Park looked at Lyris, who nodded. Do it. Alarms began blaring. Contamination detected. All personnel don protective equipment. Emergency venting in 3 minutes. Environmental suits are in the cabinet, Park said, already pulling one on. We suited up quickly. The suits were bulky, designed for medical emergencies, not combat, but they'd keep us alive in vacuum. 2 minutes to venting, the automated system announced. Through the quarantine ward's window, I could see mercenaries breaching the outer hull. They'd expected to find us trapped. Instead, they found a medical bay about to vent into space. 1 minute to venting. Hold on to something, I said, grabbing a support beam. The mercenaries realized what was happening too late. They tried to retreat, but the breach they'd created became their doom. When the emergency venting triggered, everything not secured was pulled toward that breach, including them. I watched them tumble into space, their armor not rated for vacuum. Even if they had emergency systems, they'd be out of the fight for a while. Venting complete. Atmospheric restoration in progress. We waited for the air to return, then moved out of the quarantine ward. The medical bay was a mess, but we were alive. That was insane, Lyris said through her suit's communicator. That was thinking like a human, I replied. When the rules don't favor you, change the game. A new voice crackled over the communication system. This is Admiral Reyes of the Alliance Fleet. We've received your distress signal. Marines are en route. Hold your position. Alliance Fleet, Lyris asked. How did they... I triggered a fleet-wide emergency beacon when we were in the maintenance tunnels, I admitted. Another piece of illegal tech. How much illegal equipment do you have? Enough to keep you alive. Through the breach, temporarily sealed with an emergency field, we could see Alliance ships dropping out of hyperspace. Marine shuttles were already launching. It's over, Korvac said, relief clear in his voice. No, I said, watching the ships. This was just the opening move. The true path revealed themselves too early. They were forced to act before they were ready. The question is why? Lyris pulled off her helmet as the atmosphere stabilized. Because they knew about the investigation. They knew we were getting close. Which means, we have a leak. Someone in my inner circle is feeding them information. I looked at Korvac, who went pale. Not me, I would never... I know, Lyris said. You're too obvious. Whoever it is, there's someone I trust completely. Alliance Marines burst through the main entrance, securing the medical bay. The immediate danger was over, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only scratched the surface of something much bigger. We need to get you somewhere secure, I said to Lyris. Really secure this time. The Alliance command ship, she agreed. But first, I need to speak with the surviving delegates. They need to know the Sarev government hasn't fallen. You mean they need to see you're still alive and in control? Politics doesn't stop for assassination attempts. Apparently not. As we prepared to leave, Lyris touched my arm. That steam trick in the mechanical room, how did you know it would work? I didn't. But hot steam and confused enemies seemed better than clear air and dead ambassador. You risked all our lives on seemed better. Welcome to human decision-making. We call it intuition. I'm starting to appreciate intuition. We made our way toward the Marine shuttle. Lyris already composing herself back into the perfect diplomat, despite everything we'd just been through. But there was something different now. Awareness, maybe. That perfection and control were illusions. And sometimes, surviving meant embracing the chaos. The shuttle lifted off, taking us toward the Alliance command ship and relative safety. But I kept thinking about that leak, that insider who was feeding information to our enemies. They were still out there, still close to Lyris, still dangerous. The true path had failed today, but they'd shown their hand. They wanted to restore the old Sarev Empire, with its rigid hierarchies and species-based supremacy, and they were willing to kill anyone who stood in their way, including the ambassador who'd called me furniture just 2 days ago, and now trusted me with her life. Funny how quickly things could change when someone was trying to kill you. Dane, Lyris said quietly, as we approached the command ship. When this is over, when we've stopped them, what will you do? Find another diplomat who needs protecting, I suppose. And if I said I wanted you to stay? I looked at her, trying to read those purple-gold eyes. Then I'd say you're learning to appreciate human unpredictability. Perhaps I am. The command ship loomed before us, massive and bristling with weapons. Safe harbor, for now. But I knew this was far from over. The true path had revealed themselves, but their leadership was still hidden. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone realized. And somewhere in Lyris's inner circle, a traitor was watching, waiting for another opportunity to strike. The Alliance command ship redemption was everything Aurora Spire wasn't military efficiency over diplomatic elegance, function over form. The corridors were narrower, the lighting harsher, and everything had that distinctive smell of recycled air and weapon lubricant that marked a warship. Admiral Reyes met us in the tactical briefing room, a compact space dominated by holographic displays showing the station and surrounding space. She was human, which surprised me. I'd expected someone from one of the older spacefaring races. Ambassador Lyris, Reyes said, nodding respectfully. We've secured Aurora Spire and captured 43 insurgents. The True Path cell has been neutralized. For now, Lyris replied, this was just one cell. How many more are waiting? That's what we need to determine. Reyes turned to me. You're Calder, the security specialist who got the ambassador out. Just doing my job, Admiral. With illegal equipment and tactics that violate about 30 different regulations. She smiled slightly. Good work. We need more people who think outside the box. Admiral, Lyris interjected, we have a more immediate problem. There's a leak in my inner circle. Someone fed the True Path our location and movements. We've been analyzing communication logs, Reyes said, pulling up a data stream. There were several encrypted transmissions from the station just before the attack, but we can't trace the source. I studied the data. Something about the timing bothered me. These transmissions, they started right after we changed locations, after we decided to go to the medical bay. Which means, Korvac asked, which means whoever sent them was with us or monitoring us in real time. I looked at the people in the room. Lyris, Korvac, myself, Reyes and her staff. The circle of people who knew our exact movements is very small. You're not suggesting Korvac started. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. I turned to Reyes. Admiral, I need access to the station's internal surveillance for the last 48 hours. That's a lot of data. Then we'd better get started. Reyes assigned us a workroom and full access to the ship's computational systems. Lyris and I spent hours reviewing footage, tracking movements, looking for anomalies. Korvac helped when he could, but he was clearly out of his depth with security analysis. It was Lyris who found it. A single frame of video from a maintenance corridor, timestamp putting it just minutes before the memorial service attack. There, she said, enhancing the image. That figure in maintenance gear. The image was grainy, but something about the way the figure moved was familiar. They were trying to stay out of sight of the cameras, but for just a moment, they'd passed through a spot where two camera fields overlapped. "Can you enhance the face?" I asked. "Working on it." Lyrus's fingers danced across the interface. The image sharpened, resolved, became clear. We all stared in silence. It was Korvac. Or rather, someone who looked exactly like Korvac, down to the nervous twitch of his antennae. "That's not possible," Korvac said, his voice rising in panic. "I was with you. I was warning you about the attack." "You were," I agreed, studying the image. "Which means—" "A shapeshifter," Lyrus breathed. "Someone's using metamorphic technology to impersonate my staff." "Not just any shapeshifter," I said, recognizing the slight distortion around the edges of the figure. "That's Andari tech, military grade, extremely rare." "The Andari aren't part of the Alliance," Reyes said over the comm. "How would the True Path get their hands on that technology?" "By having friends in very high places," Lyrus said grimly. "This conspiracy goes beyond just the Serev. Someone's coordinating across species lines." A alert suddenly flashed on the displays. "Admiral," one of Reyes's officers reported, "we're detecting an energy buildup on Aurora Spire. Substation 12. "That's the main power distribution center," Korvac said. "If that explodes, it'll take out half the station and anyone still on it," I finished, "including any evidence of who's behind this. We have 300 personnel still on the station conducting rescue operations," Reyes said. "It's a trap," I said immediately. "They're forcing us to respond. Probably have an ambush waiting." "We can't just let them destroy the station," Lyrus said. "No, but we can't walk into their trap either." I thought quickly. "Admiral, how fast can you get a strike team ready?" 5 minutes. "Make it 3. Small team, high mobility. We go in fast, handle whatever's there, and get out before they can spring their real trap." "You're not going," Lyrus said immediately. "I'm the only one here who's been through every section of that station in the last 2 days. I know it better than anyone. Your job is to protect me. My job is to keep you alive. If that station explodes with us this close, the debris field will shred this ship." I turned to Reyes. "I need 2 of your best, people who can think on their feet." "I'm going with you," Lyrus said. "Absolutely not." That wasn't a request. She stood, and there was steel in her voice. "This is my station. My people still over there. I'm going." "Lyrus, you said it yourself. Whoever's behind this expects us to follow patterns. A Serev ambassador would never personally respond to a threat like this. Which means they won't be prepared for it." I wanted to argue, but she had a point. The unexpected move was often the right one. "Fine, but you wear full combat armor and do exactly what I say when I say it." "Agreed." 15 minutes later, we were approaching Aurora Spire in a stealth shuttle. Lyrus looked uncomfortable in the human-designed combat armor, but she wore it without complaint. Korvac had insisted on coming too, despite my objections. Reyes had sent 2 of her best Marines, Sergeants Rivera and Okonkwo, both veterans with the kind of 1,000-yard stare that said they'd seen too much, but kept going anyway. "Substation 12 is here," I said, marking it on our tactical display. "Main entrance is too obvious. We go in through the heat exchangers." "Those are active," Korvac said. "The temperature will be uncomfortable, but not lethal if we move fast." I looked at each of them. "Stay tight. Watch your corners. And remember, anyone we meet in there is hostile. The station's been evacuated except for rescue teams, and they're all in marked zones." We entered through an maintenance airlock, the stealth shuttle's ECM keeping us off the station sensors. The heat exchangers were as unpleasant as expected. Waves of thermal energy, making the armor's cooling systems work over time. But we made it through in under a minute, emerging into the substation's upper level. The place was too quiet. Emergency lighting cast long shadows, and every surface seemed to hold a potential threat. "Motion sensors are offline," Rivera reported quietly. "Someone's been here." We moved deeper into the substation, checking each room methodically. The energy buildup was coming from the main reactor room, levels below us. As we descended, I noticed something odd. "No bodies," I said. "If they took the station by force, where are the casualties?" "Maybe they evacuated the staff first," Korvac suggested. "Or maybe the staff was in on it," Okonkwo said darkly. We reached the reactor room entrance. Through the reinforced window, we could see the reactor itself, surrounded by a ring of modified equipment. The energy buildup was visible as arcs of electricity dancing between improvised capacitors. "That's not a bomb," Lyra said. "It's a transmitter." "For what?" Rivera asked. Before anyone could answer, the lights came on full brightness. We spun, weapons raised, to find ourselves surrounded, not by mercenaries or True Path soldiers, but by Sarev Prime Guard in full ceremonial armor. At their head stood someone I recognized from intelligence briefings, Hierarch Valen, member of the Sarev High Council and Lyris's mentor. "Lower your weapons," Valen said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "This ends now." "Hierarch," Lyra said, confusion clear in her voice. "What are you doing here?" "Saving our people from themselves," he replied. "And from the corrupting influence of lesser species." His gaze fixed on me with undisguised contempt. "You've proven my point perfectly, Lyris. Look what you've become, following a human into battle like some common soldier." "You're behind this," Lyris said, understanding dawning. "The True Path, Korin, all of it." Korin was a blunt instrument, useful but ultimately expendable. His hatred made him easy to manipulate. Valen stepped forward. "But you, my dear student, you were supposed to be better. I trained you to understand the natural order, the superiority of Sarev culture and genetics." "You trained me to think," Lyris shot back. "To question, to adapt." "I trained you to lead our people back to greatness, not to debase yourself with," he gestured at me, "primitive species who've barely mastered interstellar travel." "Primitive species who just saved her life multiple times," I said. "Funny how superior genetics didn't see that coming." Valen's expression hardened. "You dare!" The room shook, not from an explosion, but from something else. The modified equipment around the reactor was powering up, energy readings spiking off the charts. "What did you do?" Lyris demanded. "What needed to be done? If the Council won't act to preserve our supremacy, then the old ways must return. The hierarch system, with power concentrated in those wise enough to use it." "That transmitter," I said, understanding hitting me. "It's not just a signal. It's a recall beacon. You're calling in the exile fleet." Everyone in the room went still. The exile fleet was legend, a Sarev military force that had refused to accept the peace treaties 300 years ago. They'd vanished into uncharted space rather than submit to Alliance authority. "They've been waiting," Valen said. "Preparing, growing stronger while the Alliance grew soft. When they arrive, the true Sarev will reclaim our rightful place." "They'll start a war," Lyra said. "Billions will die. Billions of inferior beings. A necessary cleansing to restore order." I'd heard enough. While everyone was focused on Valen's megalomaniacal speech, I'd been counting. 12 Prime Guard, plus Valen. The reactor room had 3 exits. The energy buildup would reach critical in maybe 10 minutes. I caught Rivera's eye, then Okonkwo's. Both gave subtle nods. They'd been counting too. "You know what your problem is, Valen," I said, drawing his attention. "You're so focused on genetic superiority that you forgot about tactical superiority." Meaning you brought ceremony armor to a combat zone?" I moved, not toward Valen, but toward the reactor controls. The Prime Guard reacted, but ceremony armor was designed for show, not speed. Rivera and Okonkwo opened fire, not to kill, but to suppress, forcing the guards to take cover. Lyris moved with me, her weapon covering my approach. Korvac, surprising everyone including himself, tackled one of the guards who got too close. I reached the reactor controls and started an emergency shutdown sequence. Alarms blared as safety protocols kicked in. "Stop him!" Valen shouted. One of the guards got a clear shot, energy bolt searing past my head. Lyris returned fire, her shot taking the guard in the shoulder, spinning him around. "Shutdown in progress," the computer announced. "Evacuate reactor room." "You're too late," Valen said. "The signal's already been sent. The fleet knows where to come." "Then we'd better be ready for them," I said, finishing the shutdown sequence. The reactor began powering down, the dangerous energy buildup dissipating. But Valen was right. Whatever signal they'd sent was already racing through space. "This isn't over," Valen said as more Alliance Marines flooded the room, responding to our alert. "You've only delayed the inevitable." As they restrained him, he looked at Lyris with something between disappointment and pity. "You could have led them. Now you'll fall with them." "I'd rather fall standing with equals than rule over slaves," Lyris replied. They took Valen away, along with his guards. The immediate threat was over, but the real danger was just beginning. Somewhere out in the dark between stars, an exile fleet was receiving a signal they'd waited 3 centuries to hear. "How long?" Lyris asked me quietly. "Before they get here depends on how far out they are. Could be weeks, could be months. The Alliance needs to know. We need to prepare." "We will." I looked at her, still in her combat armor, weapon in hand. "You did good in there." "I had a good teacher." "Valen." "No. You." She pulled off her helmet, her hair disheveled, her face flushed from the heat and exertion. "You taught me that survival isn't about superiority. It's about adaptation." "Pretty sure Darwin said that first." "Another human." "Yeah, we're full of surprises." Korvac approached, nursing a bruised antenna. "Ambassador, Admiral Reyes is requesting an immediate debrief." "Tell her we're on our way." Lyris turned back to me. "This changes everything. The exile fleet. If they really exist, if they're really coming, then we'll deal with them, together. The Alliance isn't ready for a war like that. No one ever is. But that's when people surprise you. When everything goes wrong. Sometimes they discover what they're really capable of." We made our way back through the station, past the damage from the attacks, past the emergency crews still working to save what they could. The memorial hall was a ruin, the grand architecture reduced to twisted metal and shattered crystal. But they'd already started clearing the debris, already begun planning repairs. That was the thing about people, any species. They endured, they rebuilt, they adapted. As we boarded the shuttle back to the Redemption, Lyris took one last look at Aurora Spire. "It was supposed to be a symbol of cooperation," she said. "Now it's a battleground." "Symbols change," I said. Yesterday it represented diplomatic ideals. Today, it represents survival against those who would destroy those ideals. That's not a bad symbol either. "You really believe we can stop them, the exile fleet?" "I believe we'll try. And sometimes, that's enough." The shuttle pulled away from the station, heading back to the Alliance ship. In the distance, stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the drama of organic life. But somewhere among those stars, a fleet that had been waiting 300 years was beginning to move. We'd stopped the immediate threat, exposed the conspiracy, saved lives. But Valen was right about one thing. This was far from over. The real battle was just beginning. "Dane," Lyris said as we approached the Redemption, "whatever happens next, I want you with me." "As your security." "As my advisor, my partner." She paused. "My friend." I looked at her. This alien who'd gone from dismissing me as furniture to trusting me with her life, and now calling me friend. Well, when you put it that way, How can I refuse? You can't. I'm very persuasive. Is that a Serev trait? No, that's personal. The shuttle bay doors opened, welcoming us back to relative safety. Admiral Reyes was waiting, along with a contingent of Alliance officials who'd arrived while we were gone. The debrief would be long, the planning longer, and the preparation for what was coming would test every alliance, every friendship, every belief about superiority and cooperation. But for now, in this moment, we were alive. We'd faced betrayal from within and survived. We'd stopped a madman's plan to restore an empire built on genetic superiority. And somewhere in the midst of all that, an arrogant alien ambassador and a primitive human security guard had become something neither expected partners. The universe was full of surprises like that. The journey to Serev Prime took 3 days through hyperspace. 3 days of preparation, planning, and political maneuvering that made combat look simple by comparison. The Alliance had mobilized everything they had, but everyone knew it wouldn't be enough if the exile fleet was even half as powerful as legend suggested. Lyris spent most of the journey in conference calls with various council members, each one trying to position themselves in the new power structure that would emerge after Valen's arrest. I watched from the sidelines, learning more about Serev politics in those 3 days than I had in years of intelligence briefings. They're circling like vultures, I said after a particularly contentious call. They're politicians, Lyris replied. It's what they do. Even with an invasion fleet coming, especially then, crisis creates opportunity for those ruthless enough to seize it. We were in her quarters on the Redemption, a space that had somehow become our unofficial command center. Maps, tactical displays, personnel files, and empty coffee cups covered every surface. Korvac was there too. Having appointed himself as Lyris's permanent assistant, despite no one actually asking him to. "Ambassador," he said, looking up from his datapad. "The High Council has agreed to see you. Tomorrow. 1400 hours. Prime Standard Time." "All of them?" Lyris asked. "All surviving members. 3 seats are vacant after the arrests." Valen hadn't been the only council member involved in the conspiracy. The investigation had revealed 2 others, though both claimed they were coerced. The truth would come out eventually. But for now, the council was wounded and wary. "They'll try to blame you," I said. "Say you should have seen Valen's betrayal coming." "Probably. But I have something they need more than a scapegoat." "Which is you." She looked at me directly. "A human who's proven more loyal than their own security forces. Living proof that their assumptions about species superiority are wrong." "I'm not a political prop, Lyris." "No, you're not. But you are evidence. And in politics, evidence is power." The next day, we stood before the Serev High Council in their ancient chamber on Prime. The architecture was even more impressive than Aurora Spire. Crystal spires that seemed to grow from the ground itself, reaching toward a sky painted purple by the planet's unique atmosphere. The council sat in a semicircle, each member on a throne that floated several feet above the ground, a not-so-subtle reminder of their elevated status. At the center, where Valen's throne sat empty, a hologram of the Serev Constitution rotated slowly. Ambassador Lyris, the acting High Counselor, an ancient Serev named Tivos, began. "You stand before us to account for the recent catastrophe at Aurora Spire." "I stand before you to report on the prevention of a coup," Lyris corrected. "And to warn of an imminent invasion." "A coup orchestrated by your own mentor, under your watch." "A coup I exposed and stopped, with the help of Alliance forces." "Human forces," another counselor, Merrick, said with obvious distaste. "You brought a primitive species into our most sensitive operations. That primitive species saved my life, multiple times, while Serev security forces were actively trying to kill me." "Because you trusted the wrong people." "Because we all did." Lyris stepped forward. "Every person in this room approved Valen's appointments. Every person here ignored the warning signs of the True Path's growth. We were all blind to the rot in our own house. You dare, Marak started. I dare speak truth in this chamber, as is my right as ambassador. Lyrus's voice carried the kind of authority that made even floating thrones seem less impressive. The question isn't how we failed to see Valen's betrayal. It's what we do now that the exile fleet is coming. If they're coming, Tivos said, we have only Valen's word that they even exist. That's when I stepped forward. Actually, we have more than that. The council turned their attention to me, most seeing me for the first time. I felt their assessment, their dismissal, their assumption that I was just muscle with no brain. Speak, human, Tivos said, managing to make human sound like an insult. 3 hours ago, long-range sensors detected gravitational anomalies at the edge of the system, the kind you get from large-scale hyperspace exits. I pulled up the data on my portable display, projecting it for them to see. Someone's scouting, testing our defenses. This proves nothing, Mirak said. It proves someone received Valen's signal and is responding. Whether it's the full exile fleet or advanced scouts, you have incoming hostiles. You presume to lecture us on military matters. I presume to share intelligence that might keep your planet from becoming a battlefield. I met each counselor's gaze in turn. But if you'd prefer to debate superiority while your enemies gather strength, don't let me interrupt. The chamber went quiet. No one spoke to the council that way, especially not a human. Lyrus used the silence. The Alliance is mobilizing a defense fleet. Every member species is contributing ships and personnel, except the Serev. We need our forces here to defend Prime, Tevos said. You need your forces fighting alongside the Alliance, proving the Serev are partners, not the supremacists Valen claimed we are. And if we refuse, then you prove Valen right, that the Serev care only for themselves. That cooperation was always a facade. Lyrus paused. And when the exile fleet is defeated, because they will be defeated, the Serev will have no place in the new order that follows. It was a masterful play. Appeal to their self-interest while framing cooperation as strength rather than weakness. The council murmured among themselves, their voices too low for the translators to catch. Finally, Tevos spoke. We will consider your proposal, but first, there's another matter. The human. What about him? Lyrus asked. He's been inside our most secure facilities, learned our protocols, seen our weaknesses. That knowledge cannot leave Serev space. Are you threatening him? We're stating facts. He can remain here, in protective custody, or he comes with me, Lyrus interrupted. As my registered security advisor, he has diplomatic immunity. That status hasn't been approved. Then approve it now. She pulled out a data pad. The paperwork's already filed. It just needs council authorization. Mirak laughed. A sound like crystal chimes in a hurricane. You want us to officially sanction a human in such a position? It's unprecedented. These are unprecedented times. The answer is no. That's when things got interesting. Korvac, who'd been silent in the corner, suddenly spoke up. Actually, Counselor, there is precedent. Everyone turned to look at him. He flushed that grayish color that meant a Serev was embarrassed, but continued. The Treaty of Kelos, signed 800 years ago. It allows for emergency appointment of advisors from allied species during times of existential threat. He pulled up the relevant text. The exile fleet certainly qualifies as an existential threat. That treaty was with the Andromedans, Tivos said. No, it was with any allied species. The Andromedans were just the only allies we had then. Korvac's antennae twitched nervously, but he stood his ground. Legally, you have to approve it. The council looked like they'd swallowed something particularly unpleasant, but Korvac was right, and they knew it. Fine, Tivos said through clenched teeth. The human is approved as security advisor, temporarily. Thank you, Lyrus said, though her tone suggested anything but gratitude. We were about to leave when an alert echoed through the chamber. Every counselor's personal display lit up with the same message. "What is it?" Lyris asked. Tevos's face had gone pale. "Valen. He's requesting to address the council. Says he has information about the conspiracy that we need to hear." "It's a trick," I said immediately. "Perhaps. But he's invoking his right as a former counselor. We're legally obligated to hear him." They brought Valen in under heavy guard, energy shackles on his wrists and ankles. He looked older somehow, diminished, but his eyes still held that fanatic gleam. "Honored counselors," he began, his voice still carrying that natural authority. "I come before you to confess, and to warn." "We've heard your confession," Tevos said. "You betrayed everything the Serev stand for. Did I try to save us from extinction?" Valen looked at each counselor. "Yes. I contacted the exile fleet. Yes. I orchestrated the attacks. But not for personal power." "Then why?" Lyris asked. "To prevent a greater catastrophe." He turned to her. "My dear student, you were always too trusting. You never asked the right questions, like why the Alliance really wanted human security at the summit." "To prevent Serev dominance in security matters," Lyris said. "No. To place human operatives in position to eliminate Serev leadership?" He smiled coldly. "The humans have been planning their own coup, using the true path as cover." "That's ridiculous," I said. "Is it? How many illegal devices did you use, Mr. Calder? How many protocols did you violate? You had equipment and access that no simple security guard should have." "Because I'm thorough. Because you're a spy, placed there specifically to get close to Lyris, to gain access to Serev's secrets." "You're lying." Tell me, what's your real military rank? Not the sergeant you claim to be, but your actual designation in human intelligence?" The room went very quiet. I felt Lyris looking at me, waiting for a denial. "I'm not intelligence," I said carefully. "No, you're something worse. Special operations, black ops, the kind of soldier who does things governments don't admit to." Valen's smile widened. "I had you investigated, Mr. Calder. The Kepler Station incident, you weren't just there. You led the counter-assault. 38 dead. You said you failed to mention 20 of them were killed by you personally. They were Vorthak raiders. They were sentients. And you killed them with the same efficiency you've shown here." He turned back to the council. "This is who you're trusting. A human assassin who's manipulated his way into the highest levels of Serev security." "Dane," Lyris's voice was quiet, uncertain. "I could lie, deny everything, but that would just prove Valen's point about deception." "I was special operations," I admitted. Past tense. I left after Kepler because I was tired of killing. Took a security position because I wanted to protect instead of destroy." "Convenient story," Valen said. "True story, which is more than you can say." I stepped toward him. "You want to talk about investigation? Let's talk about the accounts you have in non-alliance banks, the communications with arms dealers, the preparation